Hi Adams, this is Ms. Kovarik, and we are on Unit 7, Lesson 5, and today we're going to reread a section of the chapter we read last lesson, and we're going to talk about the truth about Paul Revere. So this is from the last chapter we read. The section is called The Night Rider. One of the men keeping an eye on the British was Paul Revere. He had heard that the British soldiers were getting ready to march out to Concord. He knew there were only two ways to get to Concord from Boston. One was to march there on foot, the other was to cross the Charles River in boats and then march the rest of the way. It was not possible to tell which way the British would go until they set out. Revere came up with a clever plan. He told a friend to hang lanterns in the belfry of the North Church in Boston. If the soldiers left Boston on foot, Revere's comrade was to hang one lantern. If they set off in boats, he was to hang two lanterns. And here is a picture of what the lantern might have looked like. On the night of April 18th, 1775, Revere's friend ran up to the belfry and hung two lanterns. Then Revere and several other patriots jumped into action. Revere got into a rowboat and rowed across the Charles River, right past a British warship. Once he made it across, he jumped onto a horse and set off along the same road the soldiers would be taking. Paul Revere and other riders, including William Dawes and Samuel Prescott, rode through the night to awaken the sleeping colonists. Paul Revere, well known for the popular cry, "The British are coming," never actually spoke those words, let alone yelled them into the darkness. Today, historians believe it is more likely he quietly warned colonists, "The regulars are coming out." Paul Revere never made it to Concord that night, but he did ride to Lexington to warn Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who were wanted by the British and in hiding there. Because of Revere and the other riders, people who lived along the road knew the British soldiers were headed toward Concord. Hundreds of Minutemen grabbed their guns and prepared to defend their homeland. And here is a painting of Paul Revere's ride. This was created more than 100 years after the night of April 18, 1775. So 100 years after Paul Revere actually took his ride. It says the scene depicted is not entirely accurate. However, it does convey the tension and drama of the events that took place that night. So you can see in this picture, here's Paul Revere on his horse. There's a lot of other guys standing around him, and you can see that he's kind of yelling up to this person in the window. We just talked about how he did not have many men near him. He was alone, and he wasn't yelling. He was most likely whispering so that other people didn't hear him. All right, so you have a couple written responses today. Number one, what historical event took place on April 18, 1775 is described on these pages. So you're going to say, the historical event is ... finish the sentence. Actually, let's do a blank. So the historical event is blank, and then ends it with a period. Number two, which way were the British soldiers going to Concord from Boston? So we talked about how there were two different ways. Oops, spelled that wrong. So fill in the blank. How are they going? How are they traveling? Number three, how did Paul Revere know the British soldiers were going this way? And again, feel free to pause my video so you can type in your response and then press play when you're ready to go. So for number three, we're going to say, oh my goodness, Miss K cannot type today. So Paul Revere knew the British were going that way because blank. How did he know? What did he see? Number four, why did Paul Revere ride? So he rode because blank. What was his purpose? What was he trying to do? What was his goal? Number five, was Paul Revere the only person who rode toward Concord to try and warn the colonists? So you're either going to say yes, he was alone, or no, he was with blank. So was he by himself, or did other people help him ride toward Concord to warn the colonists? And number 6, how did he warn colonists according to historians? So you can say he warned colonists by blank. All right, so all of your starters are there. All you need to do is copy and fill in the blank, and all of your answers are right here in this one section. All right, so pretty easy reading assignment today. Make sure you answer in complete sentences. All right, and then you're going to click next, and you just have one writing response today. So I want you to write at least 3 sentences responding to the prompt below. It says, the Boston Tea Party occurred in 1773, 8 years after the Stamp Act of 1765. So the colonists had been living with unfair taxation for many years. Was it right for the Sons of Liberty to take such strong action by dumping the tea? Be sure to include both sides of the argument. So this is an opinion, but I do want to make sure that you're looking at both sides of the argument. A good persuasive essay talks about the side you're for and the side you're against. So we can start our paragraph by saying, I think the colonists should or shouldn't have dumped the tea. So there's one sentence, your topic sentence. Now you have to give me at least 2 detailed sentences to support that. So give me 2 sentences that explain your answer, and make sure you talk about both sides. So you can tell me why it was fair, and you can also say, well, they had a point because this happened as well. So think about the British viewpoint and think about the colonist viewpoint as well. All right, let's head over to skills. So we're going to look at a poem today for skills, and it's called Paul Revere's Ride by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And this was written in 1860, which means long after the Paul Revere event actually took place. All right, here we go. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light, 1 if by land and 2 if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed on the landscape far and near. Then impetuous stamped the earth and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower on the old North Church, as it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and somber and still. And lo, as he looks on the belfry's height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns. Okay, so as always with poetry, you got to listen to it more than once to understand it. So please rewind me again, listen to that one more time, pay attention to the words that he uses, and try to really picture what's going on in your mind as I read. All right, and also we're going to try and compare that to the Paul Revere reading we did here. So think about how this reading might have been a little bit different from the poem. And here are your questions. Number 1, what does it mean when he says, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year? So what does the author mean when he says that no one is alive who remembers that day? Number 2, is it just a yes or no? Does this poem have a rhyme scheme? So look at the end of each line and see if any of those words rhyme. You can also listen to me speak and you can hear the rhymes. Number 3, who is he in the first line referring to? So right here, the first line, they're even labeled for you. Maybe it's, oh, sorry, there's first lines everywhere. So it's this first line, my bad. The second stanza, he said to his friend. So who is the he there? And I will add in so that you guys know that it's a second stanza. They're all labeled number 1. Number 4, what does 1 if by land and 2 if by sea mean? So you can get this from the poem, and we also talked about it in the text. So what was the 1 and the 2 thing talking about? What does land and sea mean? Number 5, impetuous means done without thinking or acting in an emotional way. So what does the poem mean when he says, then impetuous stamped the earth? So if he's doing it without thinking, he's stamping the earth. What is happening here? Number 6, the word spectral means ghost-like, and the word somber means sad and serious. Why might the belfry be described as lonely, spectral, somber, and still? Number 7, why do you think Paul Revere springs to the saddle, but then he waits? Lingers means waits, and gazes means looks. So he gets up on his horse, but then he stops and he looks. What is he looking for? And then the last question is to simply name one detail from the poem that is different from what we read in the reader. So think of one difference from this reading, The Night Rider, and the poem that we just read in Skills. All right, that is all for today. Please get on Zoom if you need any help, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye, Adams.